Welcome back in. It is no secret that Georgia's schools and schools around the country have struggled with the challenge of chronic absenteeism, and it has become even more challenging since the COVID pandemic. The issue of students not showing up for school, not attending, and frequently not attending. It is a challenge that families, communities, school districts have been battling. We have Professor Tim Sass now joining us. He is a Georgia State University professor. Professor, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Thanks for making the time to be with us. I know that you and I believe a few colleagues have really been working to drill down on this issue of chronic absenteeism, looking for the root causes, and importantly, identify solutions. Can you tell us at the 30,000-foot view a little bit about your work?
Sure. As you mentioned, that since the return of students to classes after the end of the pandemic, chronic absenteeism has been a big problem throughout the metro area and Georgia and the U.S. We were approached by Fulton County Schools to take a look at a pilot program they initiated to try and address the issue. And what they did was to offer students a sort of second chance bus ride in the morning. So if a student didn't show up for school, then they would get a notification, be it by text or email, or in some cases, personalized phone calls. And then the district sent around a school bus along the normal route, starting at about 9:15, to pick up students that didn't make it to school.
It was almost I mean, you described it as a second chance bus. I think it was in the literature I read, it was called the attendance recovery bus, and it was effectively if a student doesn't make it onto the bus at the normal pickup time, faculty, staff, school administrators would put the word out that you got to send that bus back around and try to get that student another shot at getting into the classroom, right?
That's right. And the pilot was done in two elementary schools in the South Fulton area. Prior research shows that improvements in attendance over the last couple of years have been uneven. Schools in more affluent areas have seen a much greater improvement in absenteeism than schools serving areas where there's high rates of poverty. So Fulton County Schools wanted to pilot this recovery bus in two South Fulton schools. And that began at the end of January 2025. And we worked with the district to try and evaluate the impact of that recovery bus.
What did you find? Was the recovery bus program effective?
Unfortunately, no. We compared students in the two pilot schools with students in other South Fulton elementary schools. And before the pilot, the attendance rate tracked along very similar with these two schools having somewhat higher rates of absenteeism, but it followed the same sort of pattern. And then after the recovery bus program started, we didn't see any improvement. If anything, the gap between these two pilot schools and other South Fulton elementaries seemed to widen a bit. So unfortunately, it didn't have a significant improvement in attendance for the schools in the pilot program.
Professor, let me ask you just a couple more questions on this front, and then I want to let you go because I know you're doing important work at Georgia State and on an important topic here when we're talking about kids and their education and their access to education. I would be remiss if I did not raise this question. I'm sure others who are watching may be thinking of this too. Given the scope of the challenge of absenteeism and students missing school, this recovery bus program only happened in two elementary schools. It was fairly limited. Is there a chance that because of the limited scope, that skewed the results at all?
Well, that's possible. It's a small sample, but also the district intentionally picked these two schools because they had high rates of absenteeism. So one would think that if the program was going to be effective, would be in these schools. And what we found was that the recovery bus wasn't used very much. Um, Typical day, maybe 10, 12 kids between the two schools were picked up on this recovery bus. Some days as high as 20, but um, it wasn't used very often. About a third of the kids that rode the bus only rode it once during the spring semester. So I think that was part of the problem. Is just there wasn't much take up from the students.
Professor, do you have a sense of, and I want to ask you these last two questions. They're somewhat in tandem, but I want to ask them one by one to avoid confusing myself here. But do you have a sense of what the main driving factors of chronic absenteeism are?
Well, I, it's hard to pick one or two. There's a lot of factors. Some of the most important things seem to be that if parents are made aware that their child is missing school more than other kids, seems to matter. Um, Transportation does seem to be an issue that people talk about. And then more generally, uh, there's at least some suggestive evidence that people's attitudes toward the importance of attendance has changed. During the pandemic, obviously, kids were learning remotely, and it seems like um, there's less of an emphasis on attendance. There's less engagement with school amongst many students. So that could be the overriding factor.
Professor, last question for you, and I know this is a complex area, and I know you and your team are researching it. The recovery bus in your findings was not all that effective. You laid out some of the driving factors of the problem. Do you have any sense of different programs, different initiatives that may have a chance of more successfully addressing this absenteeism problem?
Yeah, I think there's some evidence, and in fact, work that we did at Georgia State prior to the pandemic, that having personalized messages to students and their parents, um, letting them know not only that their child missed school, but also how often they're missing school and how that compares to other students. That um, some parents seem unaware that their student is missing a lot of class relative to other students. So we think information is an important factor, but there's a lot we still don't know about the absenteeism problem, and more work to be done.
Professor Tim Sass, Georgia State University, thanks for your work on this topic and thank you for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.